I accidentally texted a stranger. He changed my life forever. The phone screen blurred through Sarah Mitchell's tears as she typed the message she'd been dreading to send. Her fingers hovered over the send button, pride warring with desperation. $3.47. That's all she had left in her account. And her 8-month-old son Connor needed formula. Not just any formula, but the specialized kind that cost twice as much as regular brands because of his severe allergies. Sarah stared at the words on her screen one more time. Mike, I know I said I wouldn't ask again, but I'm desperate. Need $60 for Connor's formula. Payday is next Thursday. I promise I'll pay you back this time. She closed her eyes and hit send before she could change her mind, then collapsed onto the worn futon that served as both her couch and bed in the tiny studio apartment she could barely afford. The baby monitor crackled with Connor's soft breathing, the only sound that brought her any peace these days. She'd already diluted his last bottle more than the pediatrician would approve of, stretching what should have been 2 days of formula into nearly a week. The guilt gnawed at her constantly, but what choice did she have? Sarah had been a promising software engineer at a startup in Portland before Connor arrived. The pregnancy had been unexpected, and Connor's father, a fellow developer named Ryan, had made it clear that fatherhood wasn't in his plans. He'd transferred to the San Francisco office before Connor was born and hadn't looked back. The startup had been understanding at first, but when Connor's health issues required constant doctor visits and sleepless nights that affected her performance, they'd found reasons to let her go during the probation period. No benefits, no severance, just a handshake and best wishes. Her phone buzzed, making her heart leap with hope, but the message that appeared made her stomach drop. I think you've reached the wrong number. I'm not Mike. Horror washed over Sarah like ice water. She checked the number again, her tired brain finally registering that she'd transposed 2 digits of her brother's new cell number. He'd changed carriers last week and given her the new number over a rushed phone call while she'd been dealing with a screaming Connor. She'd obviously written it down wrong. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, she typed frantically. Wrong number. Please just delete that message. She threw her phone onto the futon cushion beside her and pressed her hands against her face. Mortification burning through her exhaustion. Another failure. Another mistake in a long series of them that had become her life since Connor's birth. Across the city, in a sleek corner office overlooking the Willamette River, 46-year-old CEO Jonathan Blake stared at the message on his phone. He'd been reviewing acquisition contracts for the past 4 hours, the kind of high-stakes negotiations that usually consumed his full attention. But something about those desperate words made him pause. Jonathan rarely used this particular phone number. It was reserved for family and a handful of close friends, a sanctuary from the constant demands of running Cascade Industries, a tech manufacturing company he'd built from nothing over 2 decades. This was clearly a wrong number, and his first instinct was to simply acknowledge the mistake and return to his contracts. But the mention of a baby needing formula stopped him. The raw desperation in that message reminded him of something, or someone, from long ago. Before he could overthink it, Jonathan typed a response. Is your baby going to be okay? When Sarah saw the message, confusion replaced her embarrassment. Why would a complete stranger care about Connor? Her immediate thought was danger. She'd read enough news stories about online predators and scammers who used any opening to exploit vulnerable people. But exhaustion had worn down her defenses, and something about the simple, genuine question made her respond. We'll manage. Sorry for bothering you. The reply came quickly. I could help. No expectations, no strings. Sarah actually laughed, a bitter sound in the empty apartment. There were always strings, always expectations. That's what she'd learned over the past year. Thanks, but I don't accept money from strangers, she typed back, even as a small voice in her head screamed at her for turning down potential help. Smart policy, came the response. I'm Jonathan. Now I'm not quite a stranger. What formula does your son need? Sarah stared at the message, her finger hovering over the block button. This was insane. No one just offered money to random wrong numbers. And yet, something made her hesitate. Maybe it was the straightforward tone, the lack of anything creepy or manipulative in his words. Or maybe it was just desperation clouding her judgment. "Why would you help someone you don't even know?" she typed. In his office, Jonathan looked out at the city lights beginning to twinkle as evening approached. Why indeed? His executive assistant would say he was procrastinating on the Meridian Steel acquisition. His therapist would say he was still processing grief through action. Both would be partially correct. "Let's just say I've been fortunate in my life," he typed carefully. "And I remember very clearly when I wasn't. Sometimes we need to pass forward the kindness others showed us." It wasn't the complete truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Jonathan had grown up in poverty, raised by a single mother who'd worked 3 jobs to keep him fed. He'd learned early what desperation tasted like. Sarah read his response 3 times. Her exhaustion was making it hard to think clearly. Connor would be awake soon, hungry, and she had nothing to give him except another watered-down bottle that wouldn't satisfy him. The shame of that reality overwhelmed her caution. "It's Similac alimentum," she finally typed. "My son has severe allergies. It's the only thing that doesn't make him sick." She knew that formula well. The most expensive option on the shelf, and the only one that worked for Connor's sensitive system. Each can cost nearly $40 and lasted only a few days. "I don't feel right about this," she added quickly. "You don't know me. I could be scamming you." "Then I'll have learned something about trusting my instincts," Jonathan replied. "What's your Venmo?" Sarah hesitated for a long moment, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. She could always block him afterward if things got weird. What did she really have to lose at this point? She sent her username and then sat in silence, half expecting nothing to happen. But 30 seconds later, her phone buzzed with a notification that made her gasp out loud. This Jonathan hadn't sent $60. He'd sent $600. "This is way too much," she typed frantically, her hands shaking. "I can't accept this. I only needed 60. "Consider it an advance for the next several months," Jonathan wrote back immediately. "One less thing for you to worry about. Focus on taking care of your son." Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes, blurring her vision until she could barely see the screen. She hadn't cried when Ryan had left. She hadn't cried when she'd lost her job. She hadn't even cried when the eviction notice had been slipped under her door last month, giving her 30 days to come up with back rent or leave. But this unexpected generosity from a complete stranger broke something open inside her that she'd been holding together through sheer force of will. "Thank you," she managed to type. "You have no idea what this means to me." "You're welcome, Sarah," came the reply. "Take care of Connor." It wasn't until hours later, after Sarah had returned from the pharmacy with formula, diapers, and actual groceries for herself, that something occurred to her. Something that sent a chill down her spine despite the warmth of her small apartment. She'd never told this stranger her son's name. Sarah barely slept that night, Connor's name echoing in her mind. She'd mentioned needing formula for her baby, but she was certain she'd never used Connor's name. As dawn broke through her apartment window, she finally convinced herself she must have mentioned it and forgotten. The exhaustion, the stress, it was all catching up with her. Memory gaps were normal, right? Her phone buzzed just after 7 in the morning. A message from Jonathan. "Hope you and Connor had a better night. I have a business proposition for you." There it was, Sarah thought bitterly. The strings, the expectations. She'd known there had to be something. "What kind of proposition?" she typed back, her fingers tight on the phone. "Professional, not personal," came the immediate response. "I run a company called Cascade Industries. We're expanding our software development team and need someone with your background. Your brother Mike mentioned you were looking for work. Sarah's heart began to race. "How do you know my brother? How do you know I'm a developer?" The response came quickly, as if Jonathan had anticipated her suspicion. "I apologize for the intrusion. After our conversation yesterday, I was curious about who I'd sent money to, so I did some basic research. Your number is very similar to Mike Patterson's. He works in our operations department. When I mentioned the wrong number text to him this morning, he immediately realized who you must be. He speaks highly of your coding skills." Sarah sat down heavily on her futon, relief and unease battling for dominance. It was plausible. Mike had mentioned getting a new position at some tech manufacturing company a few months ago. She hadn't paid much attention to the details, too wrapped up in her own crisis. But this still felt too convenient, too perfect. "So this was all just a coincidence," she typed. "Completely," Jonathan confirmed. "But perhaps a fortunate one for both of us. We genuinely need a senior developer for a special project, integrating some new automated systems. It's a 6-month contract with strong possibility of permanent placement. Would you be interested in at least hearing more?" Sarah's mind raced through the implications. It seemed too good to be true, which usually meant it was. Yet her brother really did work in tech manufacturing. She'd been sending out resumes for 3 months with barely any responses. Could she really afford to reject this opportunity out of pure paranoia? "I'd be interested in learning more," she finally replied cautiously. "But I need flexibility. I have Connor, and childcare is complicated." "We offer on-site childcare for employees," Jonathan wrote back, "and flexible remote work options. Can you come in tomorrow at 11? I'll have reception expecting you." Sarah looked at Connor, sleeping peacefully in his crib, oblivious to the storm of uncertainty in his mother's mind. With her savings gone and rent due in 2 weeks, did she have the luxury of overthinking this? "I'll be there," she typed. What Sarah didn't know was that across town, Jonathan Blake was having his own moment of doubt, wondering if his impulsive decision to involve this young woman in his plans would end up helping or hurting them both. The next morning, Sarah stood outside the gleaming glass tower that housed Cascade Industries, Connor strapped to her chest in a carrier. The building was all modern architecture and intimidating success, making her acutely aware of her thrift store blazer and scuffed shoes. But she'd come this far. She wasn't turning back now. The security desk had her name ready, which should have been reassuring, but somehow made her more nervous. A friendly woman named Patricia met her at the elevator and escorted her not to a conference room or HR office, but directly to the executive floor. "Mr. Blake wanted to meet with you personally," Patricia explained, noting Sarah's surprised expression. "He takes talent acquisition very seriously, especially for the special projects team." The executive suite was surprisingly warm for a CEO's domain. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered stunning views of Portland's skyline, but what caught Sarah's attention were the personal touches, photographs of hiking trails, a vintage motorcycle in one corner, bookshelves crammed with everything from technical manuals to classic literature. "He'll be right with you," Patricia said, gesturing to a comfortable seating area. "Can I get you anything?" "Water. Coffee." "Water would be great, thank you," Sarah replied, settling into a leather chair and adjusting Connor's carrier. She used the few minutes alone to study her surroundings more carefully. This didn't feel like the office of someone running a scam or planning something nefarious. It felt like the workspace of someone who actually lived here, who cared about more than just profit margins. "Quite a view, isn't it?" came a deep voice from the doorway. Sarah turned to find a tall man with graying temples and kind eyes watching her with genuine interest. He was younger than she'd expected, probably mid-40s, with an athletic build that his expensive suit couldn't quite hide. Laugh lines around his eyes softened what might otherwise have been an intimidating presence. "Mr. Blake," she said, standing carefully so as not to disturb Connor. "Jonathan, please," he said, moving forward with an easy confidence. His handshake was firm but brief. Thank you for coming on such short notice. There was an awkward pause, as they both acknowledged the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. Sarah found herself searching his face for signs of deception or hidden motives, but found only what appeared to be genuine warmth. I should explain about yesterday, Jonathan said, taking a seat across from her. I don't make a habit of sending money to wrong numbers. And I don't make a habit of accepting it, Sarah countered, finding her voice. I'm still not entirely sure this is all legitimate. Jonathan nodded, seeming to appreciate her directness. Fair enough. The truth is, your message came at a particular moment. Yesterday was the anniversary of my son's death. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. I'm so sorry. Ethan would have been 12, Jonathan continued, his gaze drifting to Connor. Accidental drowning during a family vacation. He was 7 years old. The raw pain in his voice was unmistakable, and Sarah instinctively placed a protective hand on Connor's back. I can't imagine, she whispered. When I got your text about needing formula for your son, Jonathan said quietly, it felt like maybe I could help someone the way I couldn't help him. I know that probably sounds strange. No, Sarah said softly. It doesn't sound strange at all. The explanation shifted something in Sarah's perception. The suspicion she'd been nursing that this was some elaborate scheme or inappropriate setup began to dissolve in the face of obvious, genuine grief. And the job, she asked, is that real too? Completely legitimate, Jonathan assured her, handing her a folder. And the connection with your brother was pure coincidence. But when I mentioned the situation to our operations manager this morning, Mike recognized it immediately. He's been worried about you. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. Mike doesn't know how bad things got. I didn't want him worrying when he just started his new position. Family pride, Jonathan observed with understanding. I'm familiar with that. Sarah opened the folder and began reading. The position details were impressive. The salary was more than she'd made at her previous job, and the benefits package was generous. It all seemed too good to be true, which made her inherently suspicious. This is very generous for a contract position, she noted, looking up from the papers. We pay for quality, Jonathan replied simply. Mike showed me your portfolio, MIT graduate, 3 years at a promising startup, excellent recommendations. You're exactly what we need for this project. Connor began to stir, making small sounds that Sarah recognized as the prelude to full-blown hunger. She glanced around, uncertain. There's a private room through that door, Jonathan said, gesturing to a side entrance. Take your time. Sarah slipped into what turned out to be a comfortable break room and prepared Connor's bottle, her mind churning through everything that had happened. The job seemed legitimate. The company was real. She'd researched it thoroughly. Cascade Industries had an excellent reputation in tech manufacturing, but the circumstances still felt surreal. When she returned to the office, Jonathan was on the phone, his voice low and tense. I don't care what the board thinks, Robert. We're not cutting the safety protocols to speed up production, because people's lives matter more than quarterly profits. That's why. He noticed Sarah and quickly ended the call. Sorry about that. Growing pains of expansion. Sarah settled back into her chair with Connor. Oh, it sounds stressful. Business usually is, Jonathan replied, watching as she fed the baby. You're good with him. I had to be, Sarah said quietly. His father left when he found out I was pregnant. It's been just us since the beginning. Jonathan's expression darkened slightly. Then he's missing out on something irreplaceable. They spent the next hour discussing the specifics of the position. Sarah would be leading a team to develop custom software for integrating Cascade's new automated manufacturing systems. It was challenging work, exactly the kind of project she'd excelled at before Connor was born. One thing I should mention, Jonathan said as their meeting drew to a close. The on-site childcare facility is excellent, but there's currently a waiting list. Until a spot opens for Connor, would you be comfortable working from this floor? There's an empty office next to mine that we could set up for you. Connor would be welcome. The offer surprised Sarah. That's unusually accommodating. The project is time-sensitive and requires frequent collaboration, Jonathan explained, though something in his tone suggested there was more to it. Having you nearby would be beneficial for everyone. Patricia appeared at the door, right on cue. Mr. Blake, your 11:30 is here. Jonathan stood, extending his hand again. So, Sarah Mitchell, do we have an agreement? Sarah hesitated only briefly before taking his hand. Something about Jonathan Blake felt genuine, despite the unusual circumstances. Yes. Thank you for the opportunity. Excellent. Patricia will help you with the paperwork. You can start Monday if that works for you. He paused at the door, then turned back. And Sarah, the $600 was a gift, not a loan. Don't worry about paying it back. Before she could protest, he was gone, leaving Sarah with the distinct feeling that her life had just taken an unexpected turn into territory she couldn't yet map. What she couldn't see was Jonathan stopping in the hallway outside his office, pulling out his wallet and removing a small photograph of a laughing boy on a beach. He stared at it for a long moment, his expression complex and unreadable, before tucking it away and straightening his shoulders to face his next meeting. 4 weeks into her contract at Cascade Industries, Sarah had fallen into a routine that still felt somewhat surreal. Each morning, she and Connor would take the elevator to the executive floor, where Patricia would greet them with a warm smile and usually a latte for Sarah. The office next to Jonathan's had been transformed into a functional workspace with a portable crib, a comfortable nursing chair, and dual monitors for her coding work. The software integration project was exactly the kind of challenge Sarah had been craving. Cascade was implementing cutting-edge automation systems across their manufacturing facilities, and the software to coordinate everything needed to be flawless. She'd assembled a small remote team of developers, but the core work fell to her, and she loved every minute of it. These sensor arrays aren't communicating properly, Sarah muttered to herself, scrolling through lines of code on her screen. Connor babbled happily from his playmate, entertained by colorful toys that had mysteriously appeared during her first week. A soft knock interrupted her concentration. Jonathan stood in the doorway, his tie loosened, looking more exhausted than she'd seen him. Making progress, he asked. Some, Sarah replied, watching as he immediately crouched down to greet Connor. The baby squealed with delight, reaching for Jonathan with his chubby hands. Over the past month, Connor had developed an inexplicable attachment to the CEO, lighting up whenever he appeared. But I found something concerning in the implementation protocols, Sarah continued, pulling up another screen. The safety redundancies aren't what they should be. There are gaps that could lead to equipment failures or worse. Jonathan's focus shifted immediately from Connor to the monitor. Show me. Sarah walked him through what she'd discovered. These protocols were supposed to have triple redundancy, but someone's been systematically reducing the safety margins. It started about 6 months ago. Small changes that individually seem minor but collectively create serious vulnerabilities. Jonathan's jaw tightened as he studied the code. Can you trace who made these changes? Most of them come from a development team led by someone named Derek Foster. But the authorization codes show executive-level approval. Derek reports directly to our CTO, Lawrence Chen, Jonathan said slowly, his expression growing darker. Can you compile a complete report? Don't share this with anyone else yet. Not even Mike. Not even your CTO, Sarah asked, surprised. Especially not Lawrence, Jonathan replied grimly. And not until we understand what's happening. After he left, Sarah sat back in her chair, troubled. Why would a CEO want to keep potential safety violations from his chief technology officer? Unless Jonathan suspected Lawrence Chen himself was involved, but that seemed paranoid. Then again, Corporate sabotage was real. She'd heard stories from her time in the startup world. That evening, after putting Connor to bed in their new apartment, significantly nicer than the studio thanks to her Cascade salary, Sarah began her own investigation. By 2 a.m, she'd uncovered a disturbing pattern. The safety protocol changes had begun shortly after Lawrence Chen had hired Derek Foster, bringing him in from a competitor company. The modifications were subtle enough that they might go unnoticed until an actual equipment failure occurred. But why would anyone deliberately compromise safety systems? The next morning, Sarah arrived at the office earlier than usual, determined to speak with Jonathan before the day's meetings consumed his schedule. She found him already at his desk, staring at his computer screen with an intensity that bordered on anger. "Jonathan," she started, but he held up a hand. "I know," he said quietly. "I've been investigating too. Come look at this." He pulled up a series of financial records on his screen. "Someone's been receiving payments from Titan Manufacturing." Sarah frowned. "Isn't Titan your biggest competitor?" "Exactly. And these payments coincide perfectly with the safety protocol changes you discovered." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "I think someone's been paid to sabotage our automation systems. If there's a major failure, it could destroy our reputation and tank our stock value. Making Cascade vulnerable to a hostile takeover," Sarah finished, the pieces falling into place. "Or worse," Jonathan added grimly. "People could get hurt. These aren't just machines, Sarah. We have employees working alongside this automation equipment every day." A soft cry from Sarah's office reminded them both that Connor was awake. As she went to tend to him, her mind raced through the implications. She'd stumbled into something much bigger than a simple software integration project. When she returned with Connor, Jonathan was on his phone, his voice low and urgent. "Yes, I'm sure. Monday morning. And Robert, keep this completely confidential. Only board members you absolutely trust." He ended the call and looked at Sarah with an expression that mixed regret and determination. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to trust me." "Trust you," Sarah echoed, a chill running down her spine. "Jonathan, what's going on?" "I haven't been entirely honest with you about why I hired you," he said quietly. Sarah felt the floor shift beneath her. "What do you mean?" "The wrong number text was real," Jonathan continued quickly. "That part was genuine coincidence. But once I realized who you were, once Mike confirmed you were his sister and told me about your skills, I saw an opportunity. We needed someone from outside the company, someone with no connection to Lawrence or his team, someone who could investigate without raising suspicion. You manipulated me," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You used my situation, my desperation." "I gave you a legitimate job that you're excelling at," Jonathan countered, though guilt was evident in his expression. Yes, I had ulterior motives. But Sarah, people's lives are at stake. If these systems fail during operation, workers could die." Connor began to fuss. Sensing his mother's distress, Sarah held him close, trying to process what she was hearing. "Why didn't you just go to the authorities?" "I did," Jonathan said tiredly. 6 months ago, when I first suspected something was wrong. But Lawrence has connections, friends in regulatory agencies. The investigation was quietly closed due to lack of evidence. I needed proof that couldn't be dismissed or buried. And I was supposed to find that proof, Sarah realized. "You found it," Jonathan confirmed. "Everything you've discovered is exactly what we need. But Sarah, you need to know something else. This situation is about to get more complicated." Before he could elaborate, Patricia burst into the office without knocking, something she'd never done. Her usual composure was completely shattered. "Jonathan," she said breathlessly. "They're here. Lawrence and Derek, along with security and what looks like federal agents. They're saying," she faltered, looking at Sarah with confusion and concern. "Saying what?" Jonathan demanded, already moving towards Sarah and Connor. "They're saying you've been conducting corporate espionage. They have a warrant, and they specifically mentioned Miss Mitchell as being involved." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Sarah clutched Connor tighter, terror flooding through her. "This can't be happening." Jonathan's expression hardened with determination. "Patricia, use the executive elevator." "Get Sarah and Connor out of the building right now. Take them to the safe location we discussed." "Safe location," Sarah repeated, feeling like she'd fallen into some kind of thriller movie. "Jonathan, I can't just—" "Sarah," he interrupted, gripping her shoulders and looking directly into her eyes. "Listen to me very carefully. Lawrence knows you found evidence against him. He's trying to frame us both before we can expose what he's done. If you stay here, they'll take you in for questioning. They'll separate you from Connor." The thought of being separated from her son galvanized Sarah into action. She quickly gathered Connor's essentials while Patricia collected the crucial files from Sarah's computer onto a secure drive. "What about you?" Sarah asked Jonathan as they moved toward a concealed door behind a bookshelf. "I'll handle this," he said, his voice steady despite the situation. "I have allies on the board who know the truth. Just stay safe until I can contact you." He hesitated, then added more softly, "I'm sorry for not being completely honest from the beginning. But Sarah, everything else has been real. The way I've come to care about you and Connor, that's not part of any plan." Before Sarah could process his words, Patricia was guiding her through a hidden corridor to a private elevator, leaving Jonathan to face whatever was coming. The safe house turned out to be a modest townhouse in a quiet neighborhood across the river. Sarah paced the living room while Connor finally slept in a portable crib that had been waiting for them, along with supplies, diapers, formula, and everything else they might need. "You seem very prepared for this scenario," Sarah observed, watching Patricia efficiently organize their supplies. The older woman's expression was serious. Jonathan's been careful ever since he first suspected something was wrong. "When corporate espionage and sabotage are involved, you have to plan for every contingency." "So, all of this was orchestrated," Sarah said, struggling to reconcile her feelings of betrayal with the reality that Jonathan had been trying to expose genuine wrongdoing. "Finding me, hiring me, getting me involved in this investigation. Not all of it," Patricia replied gently. "And the connection with your brother, the wrong number text, those were real coincidences. But yes, Jonathan recognized an opportunity when he saw it. Someone with exactly the skills we needed. Someone with no connection to Lawrence Chen's network. But why not just hire a private investigator, or go to the FBI directly?" "He tried both," Patricia said, sitting down across from Sarah. "The investigation was shut down due to Lawrence's connections, and private investigators can be compromised. Jonathan needed someone on the inside, someone working on the actual systems, who could find concrete proof." Sarah sank onto the couch. "And now I'm hiding in a safe house with my baby, while Jonathan's possibly being arrested for crimes he didn't commit." "Jonathan can take care of himself," Patricia assured her, though worry lines creased her forehead. "He's been preparing for this confrontation for months. He has evidence, allies, and contingency plans." Hours crawled by with no word. Sarah tried to distract herself by reviewing the files Patricia had saved, looking for anything that might help their case. Around midnight, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Are you and Connor safe?" Sarah stared at the screen, caution warring with hope. "Yes. Is this you?" "It's me," came the reply. "Had to ditch my regular phone. Authorities confiscated my devices, but they released me for now." Lawrence is playing this carefully, making it look like he's the whistleblower who discovered corporate espionage. "What happens now?" Sarah typed with trembling fingers. "Now we fight back with the truth. My attorney has contacted federal investigators who aren't connected to Lawrence's network. We're meeting tomorrow at 9. Can you be there?" Sarah looked at Connor, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the chaos surrounding his small world. By agreeing to testify, she'd be stepping directly into a dangerous situation, potentially making herself a target. The sensible thing would be to take Connor and disappear. She had enough money saved now to start over somewhere else, somewhere safe. But running would mean Lawrence Chen and Derek Foster might escape justice. Workers at Cascade could be injured or killed by the sabotaged safety systems. And it would mean abandoning Jonathan after he'd risked everything trying to do the right thing. Despite his deception about how they'd met, everything else had been genuine. The job, the respect for her work, the accommodations for Connor, even the growing connection between them had all been real. "I'll be there," she typed back. Where? The next morning, after Patricia arrived to watch Connor, Sarah met Jonathan at an unmarked office building downtown. He looked like he hadn't slept, but managed a relieved smile when he saw her. "You came," he said simply. "I almost didn't," Sarah admitted. "Part of me wanted to just take Connor and run." "I wouldn't have blamed you," Jonathan replied, guiding her inside with a gentle hand at her back. "This isn't your fight." "It became my fight when Lawrence tried to frame me," Sarah countered. The federal agent, a sharp-eyed man named Morrison, listened intently as Sarah presented her findings. She walked through the code changes in detail, explaining how the safety redundancies had been systematically compromised and how the modifications could lead to catastrophic equipment failures. "This is exactly what we needed," Agent Morrison said when Sarah finished. "Clear evidence of deliberate sabotage with financial motivation. Mr. Blake, the board meeting is scheduled for this afternoon." Jonathan nodded. "Lawrence will be there, along with the board members he's been working with. They're planning to formally accuse me of corporate espionage and vote me out as CEO." "Perfect," Morrison said with a thin smile. "Let them make their accusations on record. We'll be ready." The plan was straightforward but risky. Jonathan would attend the board meeting as expected. Sarah would wait with the FBI team in an adjacent room, ready to present her evidence once Lawrence made his false accusations. The timing would be crucial. They needed Lawrence to commit to his lies with federal agents present as witnesses. As they prepared to head to Cascade Industries, Jonathan pulled Sarah aside. "If this goes wrong," he said quietly, "Patricia has instructions to get you and Connor out of the country. There's an account set up in your name with enough money to start over anywhere you choose." Sarah stared at him, stunned by the extent of his contingency planning. "It won't come to that." "Just in case," Jonathan insisted, pressing a small envelope into her hand. "And Sarah, thank you for trusting me even after you learned the truth about how this started." The board meeting began at precisely 3 o'clock. Sarah watched through a monitor in the adjacent room as Lawrence Chen stood to address the assembled executives, his expression a perfect mask of concerned duty. "It pains me to present these findings," he began, distributing folders to each board member. "But the evidence is clear. Jonathan Blake has been selling our proprietary automation technology to Titan Manufacturing. He's used an outside accomplice, a developer named Sarah Mitchell, to access and copy our protected systems." Sarah felt sick hearing her name spoken with such calculated malice. On the monitor, Jonathan remained impressively calm. "That's quite an accusation, Lawrence," he said evenly. "I assume you have proof." "The proof is in front of you," Lawrence replied smoothly. "Financial transfers, copied files, communication records. It's all documented." "Interesting," Jonathan said, "because I have some documentation of my own." "Agent Morrison, would you join us?" Agent Morrison opened the door, and Sarah entered with 2 other FBI agents flanking her. The shock on Lawrence Chen's face was momentarily satisfying before it morphed into calculated composure. "Miss Mitchell," he said coldly, "how convenient. Here to help your accomplice spin a story." "Actually," Sarah replied, her voice steadier than she felt, "I'm here to explain how you've been sabotaging Cascade Industries for the past 6 months." For the next 40 minutes, Sarah walked the board through her findings. She methodically explained how Lawrence and Derek Foster had compromised the safety systems, how they'd been receiving payments from Titan Manufacturing, and how the sabotage was designed to cause catastrophic failures that would destroy Cascade's reputation and stock value. The pattern begins precisely 2 weeks after Mr. Chen hired Derek Foster from Titan, Sarah concluded, displaying the evidence on the boardroom screens. But the money trail leads directly to shell companies where they're both beneficial owners. And the code itself contains markers that prove Derek wrote these modifications. Lawrence's face had grown increasingly pale as she spoke. When she finished, he glanced toward the door, clearly calculating his chances of escape. "I wouldn't," Agent Morrison warned, noting his gaze. "The building is secured." What happened next occurred so quickly that Sarah would later struggle to recall the exact sequence. Lawrence lunged not toward the door, but toward the conference table, grabbing a laptop and hurling it at the monitor displaying the evidence. Jonathan moved without hesitation, intercepting him. There was a chaotic moment of struggle, shouts from the board members, and then Lawrence was on the floor, restrained by the FBI agents. Derek Foster, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner, tried to slip out during the commotion, but was blocked by more agents waiting in the hallway. "It's over, Lawrence," Jonathan said, his voice hard. "We have everything. The code, the financial records, communications with Titan. You can't talk your way out of this." 6 hours later, after Lawrence Chen and Derek Foster had been taken into custody, after statements had been given and legal procedures completed, Sarah sat with Jonathan in his office. Patricia had brought Connor back, and the baby was contentedly exploring a new stuffed giraffe while the adults processed everything that had happened. "So what happens now?" Sarah asked, exhaustion finally catching up with her as the adrenaline faded. "Professionally, damage control," Jonathan said, leaning back in his chair. "The board is shaken, but supportive. We'll need to do a complete security audit, implement new protocols. The automation project will be delayed while we verify every line of code." He paused, his expression growing uncertain. Personally, that depends entirely on you." "On me?" Sarah looked up, confused. "Your contract has 4 months remaining," Jonathan said carefully. "But I'd like to offer you a permanent position as Director of System Security, reporting directly to the Board for Independence. It's a significant role, Sarah. We need someone with your integrity and skills to make sure something like this never happens again." Sarah blinked in surprise. "And that's a major promotion. I've only been here a month." "You uncovered a conspiracy that experienced executives either missed or chose to ignore," Jonathan replied seriously. "You risked your safety to expose the truth. Cascade needs people like you in leadership positions." He hesitated, then continued more softly. "And selfishly, I need people I can trust around me." Today proved how isolated I'd become, how vulnerable the company was. Sarah looked at Connor, who'd abandoned his giraffe and was now attempting to pull himself up on the edge of Jonathan's desk. "What about the childcare situation and the questions people must have about our arrangement?" "A spot has opened in the company daycare," Jonathan said with a slight smile. "Though Connor's welcome up here any time. As for questions, we'll address them directly. I'm prepared to be completely transparent about how we met and why I hired you. The truth is unusual, but defensible." He stood and moved to the window, looking out over the city as evening shadows lengthened. "Sarah, I know this all started in a way that was manipulative. I saw your desperation, and I used it, even if my intentions were good. I'm genuinely sorry for that. But everything after..." He turned back to face her. "Getting to know you, watching you with Connor, seeing your brilliance and determination. That's been the most real thing in my life since I lost Ethan. I meant what I said earlier, the way I've come to care about you both. That was never part of any plan." Sarah felt her heart rate increase. "Jonathan, I don't know what to say. This has all been so overwhelming. You don't have to say anything right now, he assured her quickly. Take time to think about the job offer. Take time to process everything. I'm not going anywhere. He smiled slightly. Well, I'm going home eventually, but you understand what I mean. Connor chose that moment to successfully pull himself upright, letting out a triumphant shriek that made them both laugh, breaking the tension. He's getting so strong, Jonathan observed, moving to steady the baby, growing so fast. Too fast, Sarah agreed, watching them together. Over the past month, she'd seen Jonathan transform around Connor. The guarded, intense CEO became someone softer, more open. She'd told herself not to read too much into it, that he was simply responding to any child after losing his son. But the way he looked at Connor, and increasingly at her, suggested something deeper. I need time, she said finally. Not just to think about the job, but to process all of this. The investigation, the danger we were in, finding out how this all really started. It's a lot. Of course, Jonathan agreed immediately. Take all the time you need. The job offer stands regardless of anything else. Anything else? Sarah raised an eyebrow. Jonathan had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I'm not trying to complicate things. But I'd be lying if I said I hadn't developed feelings beyond professional respect. You don't have to respond to that now or ever. I just wanted you to know where I stand. Sarah gathered Connor and his things, her mind whirling. I should get him home. It's been a very long day. Let me arrange a car for you, Jonathan offered. It's the least I can do after everything. As Sarah rode home in the company car, Connor dozing against her shoulder, she replayed the entire strange journey that had brought her to this moment. A wrong number text sent in desperation had led to a job that turned out to be part of a corporate investigation, which had put her in danger, but also revealed genuine corruption that needed to be stopped. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, she'd started developing feelings for a man who'd saved her when she was drowning, even if his motives hadn't been entirely pure. Over the next several weeks, Sarah settled into her new permanent role as Director of Systems Security. The promotion had raised some eyebrows initially, but her presentation to the full board about the security vulnerabilities she'd discovered had silenced most doubters. She'd assembled a team of developers and security specialists, and together they were methodically reviewing every system at Cascade Industries. The investigation into Lawrence Chen and Derek Foster's activities had expanded. Federal prosecutors discovered they'd been planning something even more sinister than anyone had initially realized. The sabotaged safety systems weren't just meant to cause equipment failures and reputation damage. They were designed to create specific vulnerabilities that would have allowed Titan Manufacturing to launch a hostile takeover of Cascade at a fraction of its real value. It was all about the acquisition, Sarah explained to her brother Mike over lunch one afternoon in Cascade's cafeteria. They would have bought the company cheap, then, I discovered, and fixed the safety issues, making themselves look like heroes while stealing billions in value. Mike shook his head in amazement. And you uncovered all of this, my little sister, the corporate detective. I was just doing my job, Sarah demurred, though she felt a flush of pride. Jonathan's the one who suspected something was wrong in the first place. Speaking of Jonathan, Mike said with a knowing look, are we going to talk about what's going on there? Sarah focused intently on her salad. What do you mean? We work together. Sarah, I've seen how he looks at you, and how you look at him when you think no one's watching. Mike leaned forward. And I know how this all started, with the wrong number and everything. But that doesn't mean something real can't come from it. It's complicated, Sarah said quietly. He manipulated the situation to get me here, even if his reasons were good. And there's a power dynamic. He's technically my boss. Plus, I don't know if I'm ready for a relationship. Connor has to be my priority. Connor deserves a happy mother, Mike countered gently. And from what I've seen, Jonathan makes you happy. He certainly makes Connor happy. It was true. Connor had become completely attached to Jonathan. The CEO made time every day to visit Sarah's office, ostensibly to discuss security matters but really to play with Connor. He'd taught the baby to play peekaboo and had been there for Connor's first successful steps just last week. The joy on Jonathan's face in that moment had been unmistakable and heartbreaking. "I think he sees Ethan when he looks at Connor," Sarah said softly. "I worry that's all it is, trying to recapture what he lost." "Have you talked to him about it?" Mike asked. "How do you bring up something like that? Hey, are you developing feelings for me and my son because you're processing grief over your dead child?" Mike winced. "Okay, maybe not exactly like that, but Sarah, you're going to have a real conversation with him eventually. This limbo you're both in isn't sustainable." That evening, after putting Connor to bed, Sarah found herself thinking about Mike's words. She and Jonathan had fallen into a comfortable routine of professional collaboration mixed with personal connection, but they'd carefully avoided discussing the obvious attraction between them since that day in his office. Her phone buzzed with a message. "Are you still awake?" It was Jonathan. They'd exchanged numbers for work purposes, but lately the texts had become more personal, checking in on each other after long days. "Yes, just got Connor down," she replied. "What's up? Can I call you? There's something I'd like to discuss." Sarah's heart rate picked up. "Sure." When her phone rang a moment later, Jonathan's voice was warm but nervous. "I hope I'm not overstepping by calling so late." "It's fine," Sarah assured him. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine. Actually, more than fine. I wanted to tell you that the board officially approved the new security protocols you proposed today. They were impressed by your presentation." "That's wonderful," Sarah said, genuinely pleased. She'd worked hard on those proposals. "There's something else," Jonathan continued. "The anniversary of Ethan's death is coming up next week. It's always a difficult time for me, and I usually spend it alone. But this year, I was wondering if maybe you and Connor might want to spend the day with me. Nothing formal, just maybe a walk in the park or lunch somewhere quiet." Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing the significance of the invitation. "Jonathan, that's a very personal thing to share. Are you sure?" "I'm sure," he said softly. "You and Connor have brought light back into my life in a way I didn't think was possible. I'd like to spend that day with people who make me remember that life continues, that there's still joy to be found." "Then yes," Sarah said, making a decision. "We'd be honored to spend the day with you." "Thank you," Jonathan said, and she could hear the emotion in his voice. "Sarah, there's something else I need to say. I know things between us have been complicated, and I take full responsibility for that. But I want you to know that what I feel for you and Connor isn't about replacing what I lost. You're not substitutes for Ethan or my marriage. You're something new, something I never expected, but am incredibly grateful for." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I was worried about that maybe we were just filling a void." "You're not," Jonathan said firmly. "I won't lie and say Ethan's death hasn't shaped how I see the world. It made me value every moment, every connection. When I met you and Connor, I recognized something precious, something worth protecting and nurturing. But my feelings for you are about who you are, not who you remind me of. I've been scared," Sarah admitted, "of trusting this, of trusting you after how things started. But Jonathan, I have feelings for you too. I have for a while now." "Then maybe we could try something," Jonathan suggested. "Take things slow. See where this goes without any pressure or expectations. I know there are complications with work and the age difference and everything else, but I think what we have is worth exploring." "Slow sounds good," Sarah agreed, a smile spreading across her face. "And though I should warn you, nothing about my life moves slowly with a 1-year-old around." Jonathan laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "I'm prepared for chaos. In fact, I'm looking forward to it." They talked for another hour, about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing easily, the way it always did between them. When they finally said goodnight, Sarah felt lighter than she had in months. The following week, Sarah and Jonathan spent the anniversary of Ethan's death together. They visited a children's museum in the morning, where Connor was fascinated by the water play area. Jonathan told her stories about Ethan, sharing memories both joyful and painful. They had lunch in a quiet park while Connor napped in his stroller, and Jonathan opened up about the guilt he still carried over his son's death. "We were at a lake house," he said quietly, staring at the water feature nearby. "I was on a work call, something that seemed urgent at the time but was completely meaningless in retrospect. Ethan wanted to show me something at the dock. I told him to wait, that I'd be there in 5 minutes. His voice broke. He didn't wait. He went by himself, and somehow he fell in. By the time we found him, it was too late." Sarah reached for his hand. "Jonathan, it was an accident. You can't blame yourself." "Intellectually, I know that," he said. "My therapist has said the same thing for 5 years. But emotionally, I'll always wonder what if. What if I'd hung up the phone? What if I'd put him first instead of work?" "You put Connor first every time you visit my office," Sarah said gently. "You make time for him no matter how busy you are. You've learned from what happened, and you're honoring Ethan's memory by being present for Connor." Jonathan turned to look at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you for saying that, and thank you for being here today. This is the first anniversary that hasn't felt like drowning." As the months passed, Sarah and Jonathan's relationship deepened naturally. They were careful to maintain professional boundaries at work, but outside the office, they became inseparable. Jonathan was patient with Sarah's lingering trust issues, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. He was wonderful with Connor, but Sarah watched carefully for signs that he was projecting his lost son onto her baby. Instead, she saw someone who genuinely loved Connor for who he was, celebrating his personality and quirks. 6 months after the investigation concluded, Cascade Industries held its annual winter celebration. Sarah, now fully established in her role and respected throughout the company, attended with Connor. The 1-year-old was walking confidently now and charmed everyone he encountered. Jonathan found them near the dessert table, where Connor was attempting to eat a cookie larger than his face. "And there are my favorite people," he said, scooping Connor up and making the baby giggle. "Your favorite people are covered in chocolate," Sarah observed, trying to wipe Connor's face with limited success. "I've had worse things on my suits," Jonathan replied with a grin. He shifted Connor to one arm and reached for Sarah's hand with the other. "Can we talk for a minute? Somewhere quieter?" Sarah's pulse quickened. Of course. They found a quiet alcove away from the party noise. Jonathan set Connor down, and the toddler immediately began exploring the new space with typical 1-year-old enthusiasm. "Sarah," Jonathan began, then paused, seeming unusually nervous. "These past several months with you and Connor have been the happiest of my life. I know we agreed to take things slow, and I don't want to pressure you, but I need you to know that I'm in this for the long term. I love Connor as if he were my own son, and I'm completely in love with you." Sarah felt her breath catch. They'd been dancing around these words for weeks, both feeling them but neither quite ready to say them first. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. "I kept telling myself it was too soon, too complicated. But Jonathan, I love you." "Then I have something to ask you," Jonathan said, his nervousness increasing. "And before you answer, I want you to know there's no pressure. If you're not ready, we can revisit this in a year or 5 years or whenever feels right." He pulled a small box from his pocket, and Sarah's heart began to race. "Boss, I know how this started between us wasn't conventional," Jonathan continued. "I know there are people who'll question our timeline or our connection. But Sarah, I've learned that life is too short to waste time being cautious when you've found something real." He opened the box, to reveal a beautiful but understated engagement ring. "Will you marry me? Will you let me be Connor's father and your partner in all things?" Sarah looked at the ring, then at Jonathan's hopeful, anxious face, then at Connor, who'd toddled back over and was tugging on Jonathan's pant leg, wanting attention. She thought about the desperate text message she'd sent to a wrong number nearly a year ago, about how that single mistake had led her here, to this moment, to this man who'd saved her and then let her save him in return. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes to all of it." Jonathan slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss while Connor squealed between them, demanding to be included. They broke apart laughing, and Jonathan lifted Connor up so the three of them could embrace together. When they returned to the party, the announcement of their engagement was met with warm congratulations from most and speculation from some. Sarah didn't care. She'd learned that the opinions of people who didn't know their story didn't matter. Mike pulled her aside later in the evening. "I'm happy for you, little sister." "Really happy. Thank you," Sarah said, hugging him. "Thank you for being the connection that made this all possible, even if neither of us knew it at the time." "Funny how things work out," Mike observed. "A wrong number that was actually the right number all along." The wedding took place 6 months later, in a simple but elegant ceremony at the same park where Sarah and Jonathan had spent the anniversary of Ethan's death. Connor served as ring bearer, toddling down the aisle with determined concentration while guests smiled through tears. Sarah wore a dress the color of champagne, and Jonathan couldn't take his eyes off her. When it came time for the vows, Jonathan spoke from the heart. "Sarah, you came into my life when I thought the best parts were behind me. You showed me that there's always room for new beginnings, new love, new family. I promise to honor the trust you've placed in me, to be the father Connor deserves, and to spend every day proving that sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected places." Sarah's voice was thick with emotion as she replied, "Jonathan, you saved me when I was drowning, and then you let me save you in return. You've shown me that vulnerability isn't weakness, and that asking for help isn't failure. I promise to build a life with you based on honesty, trust, and the kind of love that grows stronger through every challenge we face together." After the ceremony, during the reception, Patricia approached Sarah with a warm embrace. "I'm so happy for you both. I've known Jonathan for 15 years, and I've never seen him this content, this whole. Thank you for everything you did," Sarah said. "For helping me that day, for protecting Connor, for believing in us." "I just helped facilitate what was meant to be," Patricia replied with a knowing smile. As the evening drew to a close, Sarah stood at the edge of the dance floor, watching Jonathan spin Connor around while the toddler shrieked with laughter. Mike came to stand beside her. "Thinking about that text message?" he asked. "Always," Sarah admitted. "How one desperate moment changed everything. How the worst day of my life led to the best things in my life." "That's not quite true," Mike said thoughtfully. "The worst day of your life revealed your strength and resilience. Jonathan just helped you see it too." 2 years later, Sarah sat in the nursery of their new home, nursing their daughter Emma while Connor played quietly on the floor with his toys. The little girl had her father's eyes and her mother's determination, already showing signs of the fierce personality she would grow into. Jonathan appeared in the doorway, still in his work clothes, but already loosening his tie. "How are my girls?" he asked softly, not wanting to startle Emma. "Your daughter has your appetite," Sarah said with a tired smile. "She's been eating for 30 minutes. Jonathan crossed the room and kissed Sarah's forehead, then ruffled Connor's hair. The 4-year-old looked up with a grin. "Daddy, you promised to play robots with me." "I did promise," Jonathan acknowledged. "Let me change, and then robots it is." After Emma finished nursing and Jonathan had disappeared upstairs with Connor's robot collection, Sarah carried her daughter to the window. The Portland skyline glittered in the distance, and somewhere out there, other people were fighting their own battles, sending their own desperate messages into the void. "You know what's funny, sweet girl?" Sarah whispered to Emma. "If I hadn't mistyped a phone number one desperate night, you wouldn't exist. Your daddy and I would never have met. Connor wouldn't have the father he deserves. All because I transposed 2 digits when I was exhausted and scared." Emma made a small sound, and Sarah smiled. "I used to believe that mistakes only led to more mistakes," she continued softly. "But now I know that sometimes our worst moments point us toward where we're meant to be. Sometimes the wrong number is actually exactly right." Jonathan returned wearing jeans and a t-shirt, ready for robot battles. He paused when he saw Sarah at the window, silhouetted against the city lights with their daughter in her arms. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, moving to stand beside her. "Just remembering," Sarah said, leaning into him. "That text message I sent. How terrified I was. How certain I was that my life was falling apart." "And now?" Jonathan prompted gently. "Now I understand that it wasn't falling apart," Sarah said, turning to look at him. "It was breaking open to make room for something bigger. For us. For this family we've built." Through the baby monitor, they could hear Connor's voice drifting from his room where he'd gone to set up his robot army. "Come on, Daddy. The robots are ready for battle." Jonathan laughed. "Duty calls. But Sarah, I want you to know something. That text message you sent didn't just change your life. It saved mine too. I was so lost in grief and work that I'd forgotten how to really live. You and Connor reminded me." "We saved each other," Sarah corrected. "That's what we do." As Jonathan headed off to fulfill his robot battle obligations, Sarah remained at the window with Emma, watching the city lights twinkle like earthbound stars. Somewhere out there, someone was probably having the worst day of their life, making mistakes, feeling hopeless. She couldn't help them directly, but she could send hope out into the universe, a reminder that endings can be beginnings in disguise. Her phone buzzed with a notification from the Cascade Industries Charity Foundation she now chaired. Another grant approved, this one for a program supporting single mothers in crisis. Sarah had insisted on including emergency funds for basic necessities like formula and diapers, remembering all too well what desperation felt like. "We're going to make sure other people don't have to choose between pride and feeding their babies," she told the board when proposing the program. Jonathan had supported her immediately, contributing additional personal funds to expand the initiative. Now, 2 years later, the program had helped hundreds of families. Each notification represented someone getting the help she'd once desperately needed, and each one felt like honoring the strange chain of events that had brought her here. Emma had fallen asleep in her arms, tiny face peaceful and trusting. Sarah carried her to the crib and laid her down carefully, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall with steady breaths. Connor's laughter echoed from his room, followed by Jonathan's deeper chuckle and sound effects for robot battles. This was her life now, this beautiful, chaotic, unexpected life that had grown from the ashes of her darkest moment. She'd learned that strength sometimes looks like asking for help, that trust can be rebuilt after it's broken, and that the most important journeys often begin with a single, desperate step into the unknown. Sarah's phone lit up with another message, this time from Mike. "Dinner this Sunday. I want the kids to meet my new girlfriend." She smiled and typed back a confirmation. Her brother had found his own happiness, encouraged by watching Sarah's transformation from desperate single mother to successful executive and loving wife. Life had a way of rippling outward, one moment of courage or kindness, creating waves that touched more lives than anyone could predict. As Sarah headed toward Connor's room to join the robot battle, she paused at the wall where they'd hung family photos. Her favorite was from their wedding day, Jonathan holding Connor while kissing her, all 3 of them laughing at something someone had said. But beside it hung another photo, One Jonathan had suggested they include. It showed a young boy with a brilliant smile, playing on a beach. Ethan. "We don't forget the past," Jonathan had said when they decided where to hang it. "We honor it by building a future that includes love and joy and family. Ethan is part of our story, part of what made us who we are." Sarah had understood. The losses and mistakes and desperate moments didn't disappear just because good things came after. They all wove together into the complicated tapestry of a real life, one where pain and joy coexisted, where wrong numbers could lead to right places, and where broken hearts could heal without forgetting what broke them. "Mommy," Connor's voice called out. "Come help us. The alien robots are winning." "I'm coming," Sarah called back, laughing, as she entered Connor's room to find her husband and son sprawled on the floor surrounded by toys, both looking up at her with matching expressions of joy and mischief. Sarah felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost took her breath away. She'd sent a text to the wrong number on the worst night of her life, and somehow, impossibly, it had led her here, to this moment, to this family, to this love. Sometimes the wrong number is exactly right. Sometimes mistakes are just miracles in disguise. And sometimes, when you're brave enough to ask for help in your darkest moment, the universe responds by giving you everything you never knew you needed. "All right," Sarah said, dropping to the floor beside her family. "Show me these alien robots." "We're going to need a strategy." Connor cheered. Jonathan pulled her close for a quick kiss, and together, the three of them dove into the kind of chaotic, perfect moment that made up their everyday life. Outside the window, the city continued its endless rhythm, full of people facing their own challenges, sending their own messages into the void. Sarah hoped that somewhere out there, someone else's wrong number would lead them to exactly where they were meant to be, because sometimes the universe has a funny way of working things out, one mistake, one moment of courage, one unexpected connection at a time. And that, Sarah thought as Connor placed a robot in her hand and Jonathan explained the rules of the battle they were about to wage, was the real magic. Not that everything worked out perfectly, but that broken things could be mended, that desperate moments could transform into joy, and that a family could be built from the most unlikely foundations. The robot battle commenced with appropriate sound effects and dramatic narration. Emma slept peacefully in the next room. And in that moment, in that house full of laughter and love and toys scattered across every surface, Sarah Mitchell Blake was exactly where she belonged. All because one desperate night, she'd sent a message to a stranger. All because one grieving man had chosen kindness over indifference. All because they'd both been brave enough to trust that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the most extraordinary destinations. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories of hope, second chances, and unexpected miracles. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that might change your perspective on life's challenges. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their worst moment might be pointing them towards something beautiful. Remember, your story isn't over yet, and sometimes the wrong turn is exactly the right direction. Subscribe now and join our community of believers in second chances.